We ask, what's the scariest encounters with real people? Growing up, I always wanted to go on a bike ride at night. Something about it seemed really cool to me. It wasn't until I was 13 that my mom finally let me. She told me to wear my helmet, have my phone, and take a flashlight. She set the parameters for where I was allowed to go. She gave me about 4 miles, which was a lot to me, so right after sunset I was off. I loved it. There were no people out walking their dogs, no kids running around. The temperature was perfect. It was really fun. So fun, in fact, I ignored the limits my mom set. You see, where I was biking was all walking paths. It was one of those grassy areas between 2 neighborhoods. There's this long path that went at least 600 feet and at a 25-degree angle. I was flying down this hill, having an absolute blast, and darted right through the parameters. My mom set these limits for a reason. Everything on the inside was close to houses and people. The outside, more specifically the place where the path I was on led to, was barren. I rode along this path for 10 minutes before I could only see some lights of the houses on the inside of the limits. After 15 minutes of riding this dirt path, I hear singing. It sounded about 30 or 40 feet in front of me. I stopped riding to hear it better. It was a woman's voice. She was singing Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles, but she wasn't singing the words, just the melody of the vocals. Her voice was strange. You know, when you have phlegm in your throat, your voice gets scratchy. That's what her voice sounded like. I inch forward to try to see her. I get close enough to see the silhouette of her hair bouncing up and down like she was headbanging. I decide to get my flashlight out. I'm thinking that maybe this person's in need of help or something, or maybe it's an insane person and the light will scare them away. So, I took the flashlight out of my pocket, pointed it at her, and turned it on. The moment the light hit her, she stopped moving completely. She was facing away from me. She had disgusting hair that seemed to be sticking together in clumps. Some of her hair was ripped off too. She was wearing a very oversized bright red hoodie. I was almost too scared to move. I think she was too, so I conjured up as much bravery as I could and said, "Sorry," in a very, oops, this is the wrong room kind of way. She did not respond. I turned off the flashlight and put it back in my pocket. Just as I was turning my bike around, she screams. She screams in an awful, awful, high-pitched voice. I damn near shit myself as I throw myself back onto my bike. I hear her voice getting closer to me. I book it as fast as I can. I don't look behind me once, and I don't stop pedaling. Her screaming grew quieter and quieter until it dissolved into the howling of the wind. In Toronto, there's a subway system ran by the TTC, or Toronto Transit Commission. They often square off certain parts of the subway route, which is basic, in order to do some upgrades or fix bits. Lately, they've been shutting down the subway rides onto downtown on the weekends. Anyways, they were doing some upgrades on the track when we were going by pretty slow, making sure not to run over anyone while they're scampering out the way. Out of nowhere, the power's cut out. Now, I should say I wasn't the only one in the train car. The car was decently long and I was at one end, and some woman was at the other. When I walked onto the train, it was up at her end where the giant bubbles of seats empty around her. She was displaying the typical signs of batshit crazy and people sort of avoid her. Everyone else was off, getting off a Yonge, but I still had another couple of stops east to go. She was laughing, audibly, and tried to tune it out by listening to some music, but it never really worked. It was so chilling that my brain sort of kept ignoring the music and focusing on her. So, eventually, I just unplugged the music and sat back, trying not to shit my pants. Anyways, the power cuts out and I'm here sitting at one end, as far away from her as I could possibly be, and the lights turn off for some reason. She stops laughing. In fact, she stopped making any noise at all. When the lights came back on 5 seconds later, when I had sufficiently shit my pants, she was not at the far end. She was 3 seats away from me, staring at me. The second the train stopped, I bolted for the ducking door. After she relocated, she did not make another sound. She just kept staring. Creepiest moment of my life. I once lived in a sort of bad neighborhood, in a very tiny house with my brother. who was rarely there. Old house, so it was a little creepy and also felt like anyone who wanted to could have broken in. One night, I was getting ready for bed and it was pretty late during a hot summer. We did not have AC, so I had one of those 2-fan window deals. The blinds were pulled down to the top of the fan and I was changing for bed. I sleep in underwear and a t-shirt. I slipped out of my pants and changed my shirt. I don't wear a bra at bed because, duck that. I'm about to hop into bed when I hear a low, masculine voice say, "Let's see those titties again, baby." I think my whole body stopped working for 5 seconds while I absorbed the fact that there was a creepy peeping Tom right outside my window, and I was alone in a house that he could get into if he wanted. I was the first and only time I called 911. I had a panic attack waiting for the police, and the very nice 911 lady had to calm me down. Bright note, apparently, it was a slow night because they sent 3 cars. I was so happy when I moved. I lived in a rather rural area, but on the road that takes you to the gas station and Walmart. It's just gotten dark and I'm pulling into my yard after getting gas. Walking on the road is a man with a bag and a young girl. It seemed odd, and since there are no sidewalks, it's not safe to walk on the road. They came a direction where there isn't a store for 10 miles, and the direction they were headed did not have a store for another 3. I'm still in my car, but in front of my house. I think about going in and telling my parents, but I just go over and ask if they're okay. I asked if they had a car breakdown, and the man says no. He doesn't take the opportunity to elaborate. The whole thing is weird, and I'm the cautious type. It was summer, and the man was slender in run-of-the-mill clothes that don't conceal a whole lot, like a gun or hammer to blindside me with. Yes, this was actually my thinking at the time. And he had a kid with him, so... Tip to you serial killers out there, even otherwise cautious people might let you into their car if you have a quiet child with you. Yes, this possibility was also my actual thinking at the time. I ask where they're headed and he says, "Just up the road a bit." How informative. The girl gets in the back seat and the man sits up front with me. I forgot the name he used, but he then says the girl, Stacy, Amber, isn't the nicest girl is giving us a ride. He's got the girl's name wrong. This whole time I've been trying to judge her demeanor to see if she feels safe and if this is her father. So that didn't help. It's full dark now and he tells me to take a turn away from the gas station and streetlights. At this point, I'm thinking, well, joke's on him. Because if he tries anything, I'll floor it into a tree on his side first. And I will not hesitate to eye gouge a bitch. We are coming up on an abandoned restaurant now, and he tells me I can let them out at the parking lot. He still hasn't told me anything about them, so I ask, "Do you live around here?" Hoping he'll point to a house or something. He just says, "Yup," and I let him out. They thank me and go on their way. In retrospect, it's pretty funny because I'm sure he thought nothing of it, but I spent the entire ride contemplating every paranoid, violent possibility. I've never seen them again. During college, I was living in a house with a few roommates. Late one night, me and the other guy who lived there were up late watching TV. Around 3, we call it a night and he goes down into the basement to his room, and I go upstairs to mine. As I'm getting ready for bed, he busts into my room, in a near panic saying someone's in his room, taking the posters off the wall. I don't know what to think and walk out of the living room with him just in time to see a semi-homeless looking guy in his 30s coming up the stairs. I demand to know what he's doing there, but he keeps saying, "I didn't take anything. Do you want to search me?" and opening up his coat. I assured him we did not want to search him and asked him to leave in a more and more demanding tone, until he finally agreed. Later that year, a girl who lived there with us by herself and hears a knock on the door late at night. Expecting the guy she was dating at the time, she just opens up the door and there's a strange looking man standing there, who matches the description of the previous poster guy, but she wasn't there for the event, so we'll never know. The guy tells her he used to live there and wants to look around the house. Keep in mind, it's 2 a.m. She says no and starts to close the door. He lunges for it and she slams it just in time. Needless to say, she did not answer the door late at night after that. So, it's 3 a.m. and I'm in my living room studying for an exam the next day. My dog is tied up outside. Suddenly, she starts going bonkers, barking and snarling into the night. I call out, then open the window for her to hush, which she usually does on command, but she just keeps it up. When I see her, I see she's visibly freaked out, so assuming there's another dog roaming the neighborhood. I was in a duplex in a woodsy suburban area, so that wasn't abnormal. I step out onto the porch to pet her and calm her down. She barely seems to notice me and keeps barking, hackling up, shaking and slobbering all over the place. Then, I hear a pleasant voice call from the street. "Hey, sorry to make your dog start barking. I was just walking home. Mind if I pet her? Maybe, if I meet her, she'll calm down." Since I compulsively pet other people's dogs, this doesn't seem unreasonable. I'm expecting to see some college dude come strolling out of the darkness, but instead, it's somewhat scraggly townie in his late 20s, shoulder-length hair, sweatshirts, and jeans. Okay, my dog starts going really crazy as he steps into the light of the porch, so he stops at the base and steps. He starts talking about German Shepherd he had, sees pictures and I think she's a GSD mix, and talking sweetly to my dog. Then he looks at me with this glazed look and says, "I'm gonna go home and lick my lips like a dog because a 230-pound horse sprinted at me today." So, that's when I realize it's 3 a.m. I'm basically restraining my dog from tearing this dude apart, and he's apparently nuts. A few uncomfortable seconds go by until I say, "Well, that sounds like quite an experience. I think I'll take her inside since it's so late." At this point, he looks concerned and a little hurt and says, "Is everything okay?" I say, "Yeah, nice to meet you." Then I drag my dog inside, locking the door. Come to find out, that guy was a former friend of my cousin's, who are about 10 to 15 years older than me, who took a lot of psychedelic drugs over the course of a couple months, and then just didn't come back one day. He goes back and forth between being normal, relatively shy guy to claiming to predict world-ending events based on the activities of animals, saying generally bizarre things like what he said to me, and sometimes acting like an animal himself. I saw him all the time after that. I was working the night shift at a hospital on a med-surg floor. We'd gotten a young man, late 20s, psych patient who needed medical care. He was paralyzed from the middle chest down but had a tracheotomy tube and could breathe on his own. I remember it was difficult to distinguish his irises from his pupils, and it just looked like he had a very creepy black eyes. He also did not talk due to his trach tube, but was able to giggle manically every now and then. One night, I had turned the patient on his right side facing the wall, away from the door to his room. We kept a light over the sink in his room so we could see when we had to work with him. I had stopped at his door, which opened into the room, and looked at him, mentally nothing that he appeared to be sleeping, or at least quiet since I could not see his face. I was facing the door and making some notes on a form clip there. I heard no noise, but suddenly the hairs on the back of my neck stood to the end. I felt like I was being watched. With my hand still in midair above the form, I slowly turned my head and looked down towards the patient. As I did, I saw his head was slowly turning to look over me of his shoulder. The angle and degree of the turn was abnormal. I just kept staring as he looked at me and grinned. Ducking evil grin. I was never so creeped out in my life and could hardly breathe. I stood there frozen for a few seconds, never taking my eyes off of him, and just slowly backed out of the room. I can't even tell you what I did after that or what happened to him, but the memory of that moment has never faded. I recently went to the hospital to get checked for mono. I was the only one sitting in the waiting room, and I sat there for nearly half an hour when a person, not sure of its gender, walked past. It was really weird looking, pink mohawk, raggy old clothes, and wide-eyed. And the way it walked shot instant chills down my back. Its legs stayed straight as a pin. They never bent. Its body also straight. And its eyes, baggy eyes that had a vacant look in them. Eyes that stayed aimed at the ceiling as the thing moved past the waiting room. That kind of creeped me out, but I did not think much of it. I mean, I was safe. There were lots of doctors and nurses around. Right? About 15 minutes passed and the nurse called me into the room across from the entrance to the hospital. I sat on the bed, which was right in front of the door to the room, which was left open, of course. As I was waiting for my doctor to come, I saw it again. It was walking the same zombie-like walk. It shuffled up to the entrance door and just stared at them. When the intercom recited the words, "Code yellow at the main entrance, code yellow at the main entrance, code yellow at the main entrance," exactly 3 times. Then 2 nurses appeared and took him back down the hallway out of sight. I thought it was a little odd, but still, I wasn't too scared. Until it happened again. It walked back to the main entrance, but this time, it did not look out the glass door. It was staring into my room. At me, to be exact. I will never forget the haunted look in its eyes. It just stared at me and all I could do was stare back. After what seemed like an eternity, it tilted its head to the right, and holy duck, the thing was walking towards me. I panicked on the inside, but my body wouldn't move. You have no idea how much I wanted to spring up and slam the door shut, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed, stuck on the bed. I did not know what the hell was going to happen. I just sat there and waited as the zombie thing dragged its feet and got closer and closer to me. Anger flashing through its eyes, it almost reached my door when a nurse grabbed its arm and said, "You silly, that's not your room," and pulled it away. But as soon as it was being dragged down the hallway, it would not lose my gaze, and all the while it was moving out of my sight. There was hate, anger, and rage in those eyes. That ducker wanted me dead. For what reason? I have yet to find out. I was in work the other day and had to get the butler's tray from the kitchen, but it was about 7 p.m. and the kitchens were long closed. Weren't needed because we were hosting a drink reception on the top floor. So there's me, walking around the darkest duck kitchen acting all brave. I'm not scared of the dark, just what I can't see. And I came to the first door, the first of 3 to get to the store. I still don't remember what the light switches are, but I go through anyways. I know there's no one there because I would have heard them. My route was blocked by a huge mixer, and that had been moved out of its place. It was too heavy for me to move. So I went around the other side of the counter and headed to the door. When I get there, I shit myself because I see my reflection in the porthole type window. When I realize what it's regained any composure, and head into the storage room and find the light right next to the door, I turn it on, grab the tray and leave it on because I know I'll need to come back later to put the tray back. On my way out, I realize there's no window in the porthole at all. This is the most scared I've ever been. Ever. Yesterday, however, I was talking to the chef about a musical festival we've all gone to a few weeks back, and told them about the freaky reflection in the non-existent window. Apparently, it happens to people all the time who go in there when it's dark, and no one can explain anything. There was a building in my town that used to be a Tesco. It was completely emptied and abandoned, ready to be demolished, but it was seriously huge. Me and my friends normally go drinking in the alleyways in my town, but we decided one night to try to break in and just chill. It was easy enough to pry open the fire exit and get inside. We used our phones for light. We checked all the rooms upstairs and then walked down in the huge, empty area that was the main shop floor. In the middle of the darkness, the whole building was pitch black, was this circle of light on the floor coming from the skylight. It was nighttime, so the moonlight was coming through, and we decided to sit in the circle to drink and chat. Now, all 360 degrees around us was complete darkness. You could not see a thing, except for what was in the circle of the light. This was very unsettling on its own, as darkness is scary enough as it is, especially in an abandoned building, even worse when you're surrounded 360 degrees by darkness. We carried on drinking, then we heard a noise from the darkness. We thought it was our friend who we texted letting him know where we were and to go through the fire exit at the back. So we shouted, "Hey man, we're over here, bro!" and waved towards the direction of the door. We saw a shape standing next to it, which was quite far away, but you could make out the silhouette of a person. This shape did not respond. It closed the door behind it and we heard total silence. We started to say the usual, "Dude, stop messing around," and "We know you're there." I was beginning to become slightly concerned as we were saying the exact same lines uttered by the soon-to-be deceased in most horror flicks. Then, we just heard moving around and scuttling in the darkness. We all stood up with our bottles in hand, trying to give the whole tough guy thing, especially since our friend texted us saying he wasn't there yet. Then, we just hear running, sprinting, the footsteps echoing louder and louder in a full-on charge coming towards us. This was one of the most fucking terrifying things I've ever experienced. We have a lot of crazy junkies in our town, so we were expecting some crazy, doped-up psycho armed with knives or used needles coming at us. Next thing, a fully uniformed officer leaps into our circle, lights on, screaming. We all shit ourselves, bottle raised above our heads, ready to fight back. Something he never even flinched at. He then begins to laugh. Not just a chuckle, but uncontrollable laughter. The other officers we then see opening the door from the inside. He obviously waited by the door to talk, but is interrupting himself with his own hysterical laughter. Eventually, he manages to muster up, "Oh, you know you shouldn't be in here. Now head on out before the big bad boogeyman gets you again. Oh man." It turns out, they saw us on CCTV breaking into the building and came down to kick us out. We walked away shaking, embarrassed, and mad, especially since while the officers were walking away, we could hear them still laughing and saying things like, Did you see their faces?" I look back on it now and laugh, but I seriously shit my pants. Thanks for listening to these 10 spooky stories of real human encounters. If this is the kind of thing that tickles your fancy, just know, Midnight Monster will be uploading daily videos right before it's time for bed. So, join in on the fun, or don't, if you can't handle the scare.